Hey guys. Tonight, we won't begin with glittering castles or lavish balls, but rather with a freezing cold morning, where stone walls are veiled in mist and tiny feet hurry across icy brick floors. We are in Pomerania, around the year 1738. In a small duchy in what is now Eastern Germany, where noble girls had no say, only the choice of gowns and ceremonial dresses. The northern wind still whistles through rows of pine trees, and the candlelight on a study desk barely illuminates the Latin pages. So before you fully relax, take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel, but only if you truly feel at peace hearing me tell stories. I'd love to know where you're listening from. And what time is it where you are? Drop it in the comments. It's strangely comforting to know someone else is hearing the same tale, at the same moment in the night. Now then, turn off the lights. Maybe turn on a fan if you like the sound of wind. And let us drift into the night, where history needs no debate, only a slower pace and silence. You are in a narrow stone hallway, where footsteps echo in hollow rhythm. On the walls hang portraits of ancestors, each with a stern face like they've just received bad news. A small girl, slight frame, hair tied high, a charcoal gray lace shawl over her shoulders, walks down that hallway. This is Sophie. Not a fairy tale princess. No dragons. No magic. Just dull etiquette, French and Latin lessons, and her mother's stern gaze. Sophie is the daughter of a Prussian general, a quiet man who preferred cameras to conversation, and a German noblewoman, cold as a block of marble. From an early age, Sophie understood, if you cannot be the prettiest in the room, be the smartest. If you can't choose the cards you're dealt, learn how to play them well. You're sitting across from her in the study. The stone walls are ice cold. The ink in the well has hardened from winter. Outside the window, snow blankets the pines. Sophie is diligently copying a passage on Roman history, her hands slightly trembling, but her handwriting remains steady, like someone charting a map for the future. In the morning, meals are a ritual, no talking, only the clink of cutlery. The rye bread is hard as roofing tiles. Butter cut into squares like military fortifications. You glance at little Sophie. Her eyes gaze far, not far in distance, but far in possibility. At 10 years old, she already knows, escaping this place won't require a white horse, just a plan. At 12, she could quote Montaigne. At 14, she understood marriage was not about love, but diplomacy. And at 15, she began to attract the interest of greater courts, among them, Russia. Each night, when everyone else had gone to sleep, Sophie stayed awake. Sitting under flickering candlelight, reading about the Roman Republic, the laws of Athens. Not to become a scholar, but to avoid becoming a puppet. She was not the most beautiful girl at court, but she had the sharpest memory, the keenest observation, and she knew when to smile. Traits no one teaches, but she had them early. You're beside her that winter night, in a room lit by a single candle and furnished with a lone bed. The wind howls outside. Sophie curls up in a thick, worn wool blanket. She does not sleep. Her eyes remain open, staring at the wooden ceiling. Not dreaming, but calculating. A teenage girl, sitting amid the cold winds of Eastern Europe, learning how to become a queen, not by blood, but by mind. Are you still awake? If you are, hold on to the silence. Because Sophie's journey, the one who would become Catherine the Great, is only just beginning. You're standing before a thick wooden door. It's just been cracked open, letting in a cold breeze from a country Sophie has never set foot in. A letter has just arrived, sealed with red wax, passed through 3 layers of officials, and finally placed on the study desk of a 14-year-old girl. The letter comes from Russia. It's not an invitation to tea. It's a summons. The Empress of Russia, Elizabeth, is looking for a suitable girl to marry the heir to the throne, Grand Duke Peter. And Sophie, a young noble from the tiny Duchy of Pomerania, has just come into view. The reason? Peter is German, living in Russia, hates Russia, and needs a German wife who is obedient, sensible, and not too ambitious. It seems the Russian court is looking for someone who will bow quietly. But what they don't know is, Sophie is not that kind of girl. You're in the room with her mother. Johanna, Sophie's mother, is overjoyed. She sees the throne as a chance to change her family's fate. A miracle that could turn their obscurity into brilliance. Her eyes shine like polished silver. But for Sophie, things are not so simple. She isn't thrilled. She's just silent. The journey begins. You climb into the carriage with Sophie, crossing the snow-covered plains of Eastern Europe. Along the way, she studies Russian. She rereads Orthodox catechisms, memorizes the rules of Russian court etiquette. She learns how to nod just deep enough, how to smile just softly enough. At night, when the carriage stops to rest, you see her by the fire, whispering Russian prayers line by line. Sophie knows well, to be accepted, she must leave behind not just her name, but her religion, her nationality, even her sense of self. She must step into a world where everything is watched. And she cannot afford to make a single mistake. Not once. In 1744, the carriage rolls into St. Petersburg. The city appears like a cold painting. Gray stone buildings. Frozen rivers shimmering in the sunlight. A palace so vast you could get lost in its main hall. Sophie steps down in a thin gown, her breath a pale mist. No drums to welcome her. Only the watchful eyes of courtiers. You're beside her during the conversion ceremony. Sophie, a Lutheran, renounces her old faith and adopts the Russian Orthodox Church. Her new name, Ekaterina Alexeyevna. Or, as we later know her, Catherine. She doesn't cry. Doesn't tremble. Just stands silently, stepping onto the ceremonial platform as if walking onto a stage she's rehearsed for all her life. That transformation is not the end of a chapter. It is the beginning of a complex game. A chessboard where every piece can turn against its player. Peter, her future husband, is another story. But we'll talk about him in the next part. For now, you and Sophie have officially stepped into a world of cold thrones, smiling words laced with venom, and stone corridors where schemes drift like the winter wind. A world where, to survive, you must learn to take control even before you hold any power. You're standing in a grand hall of the Winter Palace. Crystal chandeliers shimmer like frost. The ceilings stretch so high that every heel click echoes into the air. Servants bow low. Nobles whisper. And at the center of it all is Sophie. Now Catherine. She's preparing for her wedding. Not a fairy tale wedding. No love. No breathless anticipation. Only duty. And pressure. This 16-year-old girl is about to marry Peter, a boy she's only met a handful of times. A boy who is difficult to understand. Peter, heir to the Russian throne, is an odd character. Thin. Sharp-featured. Eyes always darting, restless. He shows no interest in his new bride. The only things that captivate Peter are his toy soldiers and war games played alone in his chamber. You step into Peter's room. Tiny tin soldiers line up in perfect formation on his desk. Prussian flags hang from the walls. In the corner sits a comic-style book depicting famous battles. Peter barely speaks to Catherine. To him, she's just a necessary piece on the political chessboard. As for Catherine, in the long nights after the wedding, lying on the vast palace bed, she still doesn't quite know what truly awaits her. They say she has become the Grand Duchess of Russia. But what she feels is that she's been locked inside a gilded cage. That marriage, as many historians believe, remained unconsummated for years. Peter kept his distance, clung to his games, and Catherine slowly sank into a world where servants were spies, corridors always held shadows, and anyone could vanish for not bowing deeply enough. You sit beside Catherine during courtly tea gatherings. She stays quiet, observing, memorizing every count's name, sensing who might be an ally, who to avoid. She doesn't fight with swords. She fights with silence, measured to perfection. While Empress Elizabeth, the one who brought her here, is still alive, Catherine has a shield. But everyone knows the Empress is fading. And once Elizabeth dies, that shield will fall. Peter, now the Emperor, will have no use for Catherine. Perhaps he'll cast her aside. Or worse, exile her. You begin to notice Catherine changing. She befriends military officers, connects with scholars, quietly supports Enlightenment philosophies. And above all, she maintains the image of a perfect wife, silent, yet always present. She is no longer the girl named Sophie, reading by the fireplace. She is becoming someone who can endure and survive in a court where every greeting carries a second meaning. She still smiles. But in her eyes you see, Catherine understands. If she wants to live, if she wants any chance to do something for herself, for Russia, or simply to remain, she will have to wait. Watch. And when the moment comes, act without a second's hesitation. And tonight you may lie beside Catherine, in a quiet room filled with hidden traps. The wind beyond the windows is still cold. The hearth glows warmly. But her sleep is no longer a child's sleep. It is the sleep of someone preparing for a very different day. You're walking down a long corridor of the Winter Palace. The wind slips through the cracks in the window panes. The sound of heels echoes off the stone walls. Portraits on either side watch you with cold eyes. This is not a place for mistakes. And Catherine knows it. It has been several years since she first set foot in Russia. The wedding took place. The title was bestowed. But power never followed. Catherine lives in luxury, yet it feels like exile. Every word, every step could be used as a reason to sideline her. Or worse, to erase her in silence. Peter, now Emperor Peter III, has changed very little. He still lives in his world of toy war games, Prussian idols, and impulses that leave the court in dread. Only weeks after ascending the throne, Peter banned traditional religious rituals, insulted the clergy, and sought peace with Russia's longtime enemy, Prussia. You see the looks on the nobles' faces as they leave the palace: worry, suspicion, even rage. Catherine remains silent. She doesn't protest. She doesn't flare up. She listens to Peter, memorizes the names of those abandoning him, and remembers this: the moment is drawing near. At night, you sit with her at a small table, candlelight flickering across the pages she turns. She reads Voltaire, Montesquieu, thinkers of the Enlightenment, men who believed power does not come from divine right, but from reason. She doesn't read for pleasure. She reads to prepare. Peter begins to resent the quiet Grand Duchess. Rumors swirl that he plans to divorce her for his mistress, that Catherine might be sent back to Germany. But there are other rumors too, that the military is slowly shifting toward her. Especially some of those who share her bed. You are with her during late teas, where young officers come to pay their respects. Their eyes gleam with reverence, tinged with longing. But Catherine is not dreamy. She knows no one stays loyal without a reason. So she gives no heart. She gives opportunity, support, and above all, the promise of a better future, if the throne were to change hands. As time passes, Peter grows more isolated. Catherine grows more radiant. Not with promises, but with poise, with wisdom, with a steady presence amid a court cracking day by day. In a narrow hallway, you hear whispers. A nobleman quietly speaking of a transfer of power. Not by bloodshed, but by consent. And Peter, he is at the summer palace, playing violin and talking about moving the capital to Berlin. The palace is vast, but shadows crawl everywhere. Not the darkness of night, but the darkness of schemes, of choices, of footsteps that leave no sound. And Catherine, still that slight figure, walks slowly through that darkness, unafraid, undeterred, simply, silently, moving forward. You are in St. Petersburg. It's July. A light drizzle falls on the palace rooftops. The air is taut as a drawn bowstring. But the streets are calm. Too calm. So calm that even the distant clatter of horse hooves sounds like the heartbeat of something waiting to begin. Catherine, now 33 years old, wears no armor, no crown, just a simple officer's cloak. But this uniform had been prepared long before, tailored carefully to the exact measurements of a future empress. And today, she will wear it. Peter is at the summer palace. Far from the capital. Far from his allies. Far from reality. He still believes Catherine to be a quiet, harmless wife. But he has forgotten that within that silence lay a vast web of loyalty, woven through nearly 2 decades of patience. You stand beside Catherine at the Smolny convent, where she has just arrived, escorted by the officers of the Imperial Guard. There are no chants. No mobs. Only men in uniform, bowing their heads and saying, "Your Majesty." She steps out onto the balcony, where a small group of soldiers waits. The rain still falls gently. Catherine raises her hand. No shouting. No theatrics. Just one simple statement: she will stand for Russia. And with that, they submit. No bloodshed. No swordplay. Only presence. She has won the hearts and loyalty of the military, not through inherited power, but through the promise of a future. Peter, upon hearing the news, is stunned. He scrambles to write a letter of reconciliation. Begs to keep the throne. Or at least, his life. But it's too late. Catherine is no longer the young wife. She is the one in control now. And she has no intention of letting it go. Peter is captured. Brought back to the capital, but not in triumph. In prison, he signs the document of abdication. A few days later, he is dead. The official report says, intestinal spasms. The truth is never clearly spoken. It doesn't have to be. In the game of power, misplaced pieces are removed. You see Catherine sitting alone in her study the day after. No celebration. No dancing. Just the proclamation of her reign. A new ring. And eyes that no longer belong to a girl, but to someone who knows she has entered an era with no way back. She was not born to be empress. But now, the empire calls her Catherine the Great. And everything that just happened was only the prelude to a reign that would last 3 decades. Outside, the rain still falls. Softly, like the breath of history. And you, still seated at the small table, watch Catherine in silence, preparing to write the next chapter of Russia. You wake up in a new room. No longer the damp corridors or offices filled with watching eyes. This is the palace of a sovereign. But it still carries the distinct scent of the era: candle wax, old paper, worn leather, and a faint aroma of dry wood from a fireplace that's cooling. Catherine is writing. A letter. Not to a lover. Not to an ally. But to Voltaire, the great philosopher in France. A man she has never met, but who has long inspired her. She writes in French, the language of thought at the time, with fine, neat script. In the letter, she doesn't speak of coups, but of legal rights, of education, of her desire to build an empire not just vast, but civilized. Catherine isn't seeking praise. She seeks dialogue. You step into the corridor, where guards bow and address her by her new title, Your Majesty. But it doesn't take long for you to realize, the crown does not bring peace. It brings a storm, one just beginning to swell. Russia is vast yet fragmented. Local lords stronger than the law. Peasants illiterate. Taxes collected with whips. Officials corrupt, courts in disarray. Catherine sees it all. And she knows she cannot rule the old way. She begins writing a new code of law, called the nakaz, or instruction. It isn't a law book in the traditional sense, but a political manifesto for reform. She draws from Montesquieu, Beccaria, and other European thinkers. She writes about equality before the law, about abolishing torture, about the ideal of a state that serves its people. You see her summon delegates from across the empire to Moscow to form a legislative commission. Over 500 people, counts, merchants, officials, nobles, even representatives from the Cossack lands, gather to seriously debate, for the first time, the future of the nation. Of course, not everything goes smoothly. Many can't read. Many don't understand what equality before the law even means. Some fiercely oppose it, insisting that peasants must always obey. Others simply came for tax exemption. The commission eventually dissolves in chaos. No new code is passed. But what matters is, Catherine dared to try. Dared to begin. And that night, back in her study, you see her not discouraged, but quietly smiling, as she adds another line to her journal. She knows, to change Russia, one needs more than ideals. One needs time, endurance, and at times, compromise. So alongside reform, Catherine does something else. She consolidates power. She grants privileges to the nobility to ensure loyalty. Offers autonomy to distant regions in exchange for peace. A price she's willing to pay. You see the tension clearly. A queen who reads Voltaire yet maintains serfdom. A woman who dreams of equality, but must partner with oppressors to secure the throne. And yet Catherine never stops thinking. Never stops reading. Never stops writing. She corresponds with scientists. Founds schools. Encourages the translation of Western books. Every decision, every policy, is a careful step across two shores, idealism and reality. On an autumn night, you see her standing on the palace balcony, looking down at the quiet square. A book in her hand. But her gaze reaches far beyond the page. Far beyond Moscow. Not for dreams of conquest, but because she knows the future of Russia won't be decided on battlefields, but in written words, in classrooms, in winter-long debates. And she, a woman once seen as a disposable pawn, is now doing what no one dared, teaching an empire how to become an empire in truth. You're sitting by a wooden window frame, watching the morning light filter through the foggy glass of the Tsarskoye Selo Palace. The mist hasn't yet lifted, and the crows outside still call with a chill in their cry. Catherine has been awake for hours. Today isn't a day for cabinet meetings. It's a day for writing letters. Not to a count in the Urals, but to Voltaire. The correspondence between Catherine and Voltaire, between a Russian empress and a French philosopher she never met, lasted 15 years. They never shared a banquet table. But every word Catherine wrote, every carefully chosen phrase, every sly half-smile tucked between the lines, astonished Europe's intellectuals. She didn't just write with grace. She wrote with intellect. She debated, quoted Enlightenment philosophy, argued against superstition, and defended reform. And with each letter sent from the palace, a signal was broadcast. Russia was no longer just a land of snow and savage tsars. It was becoming a center of thought. You see that Catherine didn't just read. She purchased Diderot's entire library, the editor of the encyclopedia. Not to flaunt it, but to preserve it. She kept the books in her private reading room, guarding each page, each written word, as if safeguarding the seeds of the future. And then, one day, the West began to notice. Ambassadors from Paris, from London, from Vienna began arriving in St. Petersburg. They didn't just come to speak of war or trade. They came to observe. To see if a queen who read Voltaire could truly rule. And you see them, these European diplomats, standing in the great hall adorned with Persian carpets, unsure what to make of a woman whose intellect outshines their expectations. Catherine welcomed them in fluent French. She led them past Dutch paintings, into libraries filled with philosophy books, and to classrooms she had recently opened for noble girls. She didn't need to prove she had power. Because there, in what was once dismissed as the cold land of savagery, stood a queen who could speak of law, of music, and of Newton. Under Catherine's reign, Russia began to open, not through war, but through culture. You see French, German, and Italian scholars invited to teach in St. Petersburg. Printing houses sprang up. Journals, books on philosophy and science were translated into Russian. Catherine didn't see knowledge as a threat. She saw it as a bridge, connecting a waking empire with the rest of the world. Still, not everyone was pleased. Within the court, many nobles began to whisper. They spoke of foreign influence, of the foreign empress changing the country too fast. Catherine understood. She knew every step forward required care. Open the doors, but keep the lock tight. So while inviting philosophers to teach, she rewarded loyal counts. While allowing discussions of reform, she strictly banned any hint of French-style revolution. She knew Russia could not copy the West. Russia would have to find its own path. You accompany Catherine on visits to the empire's first schools for girls. Children in long cloaks sit reading by oil lamps. Some are timid, but their eyes shine. And Catherine whispers, "This is just the beginning." She didn't dream of Paris. She wanted a St. Petersburg that could rival Paris, on its own terms. You're riding horseback across an endless plain. The wind rustles through knee-high grass, carrying the salty scent of a distant sea. The southern Russian sky is an uncanny shade of blue. And ahead, just beneath the horizon, lies what Catherine had long dreamed of, warm shores. It was no coincidence that the Russian Tsars always spoke of Crimea. It was the key. A land that didn't freeze in winter. Russia's long-sought gateway to the world. Catherine, though born in the frozen north, had always carried a different map in her mind, one where Crimea sat at the center of her ambition. You see her at her desk, unrolling military maps. Her fingers trace the rivers, mountain passes, and dotted outlines of Ottoman fortresses. She doesn't bark commands. She writes letters, long, meticulous, detailed, addressed to generals like Suvorov and Potemkin. She never stepped onto the battlefield, but every march bore her presence on parchment. The war against the Ottoman Empire didn't end in a season. It spanned a decade. You see Russian columns crossing the Dnieper River. You see camps pitched in bitter cold, armies advancing deeper into the Crimean Peninsula. And finally, on a gentle sunlit day, the Russian double-headed eagle flag flies above Sevastopol. There is no thunderous celebration. Just a few lines recording the victory. But Catherine knows, she has accomplished what none had done since Peter the Great. She has brought Russia to the warm sea. And it doesn't stop there. You witness Catherine and Grigory Potemkin, a brilliant general and once her close confidant, rebuilding Crimea. They don't pillage. They construct cities, open schools, lay foundations for seaports, trade routes, and fertile farmlands. You even see them embark on a royal journey, Catherine and her entourage traveling south, through the newly acquired lands, meeting the people, watching military drills, and affirming, with her very presence, Crimea now belongs to Russia. History would later call it the Potemkin Campaign, with rumors that facades were built to show Catherine a prettier scene, while reality was poverty and ruin. But no one could deny this. She came. She traveled with the nation to its newest frontier. And there, she left her mark. You hear Russian poets writing about the southern sky. Young officers retelling tales of campaigns near the Danube. And Catherine, returning to her palace each night, continues to write. Continues to draft laws. She doesn't dream of victory. She uses it to rewrite the future. The war with the Ottomans didn't just win land. It put Russia on the global stage, as a true empire. Not only for its vastness, but for a vision that no longer ended at snow and ice. You see a new map hanging in the study. Crimea is no longer a dashed line. It is now deep red, bold, and radiant. And Catherine's gaze, though still gentle, has sharpened. Not out of greed, but because she has come too far to turn back. You're looking at a massive chessboard stretching across Europe. Not carved from wood, but drawn in national borders, in treaties, in backroom negotiations. And one of the boldest moves comes from a queen of Russia. Catherine had taken Crimea, opened the southern gate. But now, her gaze turns west, toward Poland, a kingdom beginning to crack. Once a great empire, the Polish, Lithuanian Commonwealth is now frail, divided from within, nobles clawing for power, parliament paralyzed, and above all, the growing interference of foreign powers. Russia, Prussia, Austria, each with a stake, each with a scheme. You see Catherine in the state drawing room, leafing through dispatches from her embassies. She is not rushed. But she is resolute. If Russia doesn't act, someone else will. And Russia cannot afford to be left out. The first partition comes in 1772. Catherine strikes a deal with the King of Prussia and the Austrian Emperor. All three agree. Poland is too chaotic to govern itself. It must be stabilized. And stabilized, in this case, means divided. No cannons. No campaigns. Just ink and maps. A vast slice of Poland, home to millions, is absorbed into the Russian Empire. Catherine calls it necessity. The West calls it civilized plunder. You sit beside her, reading Europe's responses. Many criticize. But none intervene. And Catherine moves to the next step. She installs a Polish king, Stanislav August, a former lover from her younger years. But his throne is a facade. Real decisions come from St. Petersburg. Yet Poland does not remain silent. Among the people, voices rise. Uprisings flare. Blood is spilled. And Catherine, once again, chooses firmness. Russian troops suppress the unrest. The kingdom shrinks further. Until the second, and then the third partition. By 1795, the name, Poland, disappears from the map of Europe. You see Catherine neither rejoice nor mourn. Only silence. It is part of the great game. And she knows, being sovereign is never a gentle path. But what sets her apart is this: she never saw those lands as mere borderlands. They were places to build, to stabilize, to draw into the orbit of a new Russia. She sends teachers, establishes schools, brings Russian law to every village, not to erase Poland, but to make sure it would never rise again. You hear Poles whisper legends about the silver-haired queen from the east, the one who took their kingdom without firing a shot, but also the one who kept the libraries, the schools, and their identity, albeit blended. Piece by piece, Catherine fits the West into her imperial puzzle like a patient artisan laying a mosaic. Never hasty, never loud. But step back far enough, and you'll see, the map of Europe has changed. And Russia, once dismissed as a barbaric land, is now the one setting the table, shaping the continent's new order. You're seated at a tea table in a room draped in purple velvet, dark walnut wood, and the soft glow of tall candles. The faint scent of incense drifts from a corner. And Catherine, for one of the rare moments when she holds no pen, pores over no maps, sits quietly, her gaze distant. Not thinking of war. Not of reform. But of a man. Grigory Potemkin, the name whispered through palace halls. A general. A builder. A diplomat. But also a love now past. Past, but never cold. You first saw him during a military parade. Tall hat, thick black beard, eyes burning with something fierce yet warm. Not the kind of noble who postured, but a man who could command an army, and then, by night, speak with the Empress for hours. They loved each other, not loudly. No lavish wedding. Only long letters, tender and filled with unspoken meaning. Some said they were secretly married. Others denied it. But one truth stood clear: Catherine trusted him more than anyone. She entrusted him with rebuilding southern Russia, lands newly taken from the Ottomans. You journeyed with him to the south, across arid steppes, where there was only wind, sand, and nomads' tents. But then, cities rose. Fortresses, churches, squares, seaports. Odessa, Sevastopol, Kherson, new names. Cities not of the past, but of the future. Potemkin was not just a fighter. He was a builder. A planner. A man who could make Catherine smile, even when she was exhausted by the weight of an empire. And then, you saw them part. Not from anger, but because Catherine had to guard the throne. And Potemkin had to journey far, to dangerous frontiers, to clear the path for the empire. They continued to write. Letters intimate, sometimes playful. Silences filled with meaning. And you knew, between them, a thread still ran, quiet and unbroken. Catherine had many lovers. Younger. Handsomer. Living close to the throne. But none compared to Potemkin. For the others were merely beside her. He had walked with her, through history itself. When he died, suddenly, on campaign, Catherine did not cry before the court. She fell silent, then retreated to her chambers. For days she saw no one, went nowhere. In her diary, she wrote only one line. "A part of my soul has gone with him." You noticed the palace felt emptier afterward. The lights still glowed. Footsteps still echoed through the halls. But something in the air had gone, like a melody missing its bass line. Potemkin was no prince. But he was the sword that cleared her path. Not a scholar, but the one who understood that her heart was not only for power. On a cold, windy night, you hear Catherine sitting by the window, reading one of his last letters. Her hand trembles, but her voice remains steady, like a whisper from the past. She says no more, only blows out the candle, and lets the room fall into darkness, just as she keeps him, in a quiet corner of herself, forever. No bells. No ceremony. Just a crumpled sheet of paper passed hand to hand in a tavern by the Volga River. On it, a few scrawled lines. "Peter III is not dead. He has returned. And he will free the peasants." You look up and shiver, because those words aren't just rumor, they're the spark to a storm. His name was Yamilian Pugachev, a Cossack, a deserter, and a man bold enough to proclaim he was Catherine's husband. Yes, Peter, the man overthrown and long dead in the shadows, now, according to Pugachev, lived again, in his body. It sounds absurd. But to peasants, to the Cossacks, to the old and the broken, reason wasn't the point. They needed hope. A name to believe in. A dream to cling to. And so, the Volga burned. You see flags raised. Crude slogans. Crowds with scythes and sticks. They had no tactics. But they had fire. And rage. Pugachev promised land. Promised the end of serfdom. Promised justice. No one asked who he really was. They only needed to know he wasn't Catherine. In the Winter Palace, Catherine receives the news. She does not panic. But she falls quiet. She understands this isn't just rebellion. It's a reflection. A reminder that reform from above is never enough. Pugachev takes villages. Takes towns. Rebels kill nobles, burn estates, set up their own courts. Through one summer, an entire swath of the Eastern Empire seems to break away. The dream of the poor becomes the court's nightmare. Catherine gives the order. No negotiation. No mercy. She sends her best generals. Elite troops sweep into the Volga region like an iron tide. You hear hoofbeats, cannons, screams. It isn't war. It's a purge. Pugachev is captured. Shackled. Locked in an iron cage. Transported to Moscow for a public trial. And finally, beheaded. The rebellion is crushed. But its echoes don't vanish. In Catherine's eyes, something changes. She no longer speaks much of social reform. She quotes Voltaire less. She stops inviting philosophers to St. Petersburg. You see her shift direction. Tighter control. Stronger noble privilege. And the quiet realization, liberty, if mishandled, becomes threat. The dream of an enlightened Russia, where peasants read and nobles obey the law, gives way to reality. The empire needs stability. And to preserve the throne, Catherine embraces the very thing she once sought to transcend, the old order. Sometimes you catch her standing silently in the library, gazing up at a portrait copy of Voltaire. No longer smiling. Just a faint nod, like a quiet farewell to a dream dissolved in the clash of swords and the blaze of revolt. The wind outside rustles softly through birch trees heavy with morning mist. Inside the warm, firelit room, Catherine sits alone at her writing desk. No music. No ladies-in-waiting. Just a single quill, a stack of parchment, and a low-burning candle, its wax dripping slowly onto the wood like drops of time. On the page, she does not write love poems. Not a diary. But law. Yes, you heard right. A queen, not holding a sword but a pen, is attempting what generations of male tsars never dared, to rewrite the entire legal system of Russia. Not because it was too outdated, but because it barely existed at all. A patchwork of decrees from the time of Ivan the Terrible, stitched together by local edicts, governed by the whims of nobles. A peasant stealing a chicken might be executed, while a duke who killed a man might simply be exiled, or invited to drink his tea a bit farther away. Catherine could not endure that chaos. She wanted order. She wanted Russia to have a unified code of laws, where justice was not a privilege, but a principle. You see her studying Roman law, French codes, Montesquieu. And from this, she begins to draft a new document. Its name, Nakaz, the Instruction. Nearly 600 articles. All handwritten. Detailed. Meant for what she called the Legislative Commission. That commission brought together representatives from across the empire, nobles, merchants, clergy, even ethnic minorities. A kind of parliament before its time. It sounded progressive. But you know, it's no small feat to get hundreds of people to read the same book, let alone agree on its contents. Debates followed. Then arguments. Then collapse. After 2 long years, the commission dissolved. The new law was never passed. You might think Catherine would give up. But she didn't. She didn't need consensus. She used Nakaz as the foundation for her personal decrees. She wrote new laws on education, on property, on government administration. Not a revolution in one night, but reform, drop by drop, line by line. Yet Nakaz was more than legal code. It was a quiet political manifesto. In it, Catherine wrote that all people are equal before the law, words that sounded more like Paris than a Russian throne. She condemned torture, promoted fair trials. Though later, in the name of stability, many of the things she once believed, she would quietly set aside. You see the tension in her eyes. Catherine was always this way. A reformer, bound by her crown. An Enlightenment thinker, ruling in an age where shadows always lingered just outside the door. Her pen did not change the world overnight. But it began something else. It made Russians, and the world, start to see that law need not come from violence. It could begin in the hand of a woman, with a quill and a dream longer than any lifetime. That night you see Catherine rise. She folds the manuscript, blows out the candle. The room falls into darkness. But on the desk, the scent of ink lingers. And the parchment lies open still. As if the story is still being written, even after the writer has left the table. As the final lights along the Hermitage Palace corridor fade, and the footsteps of attendants recede into silence, you begin to hear the floorboards creak. Not from guards. Not from honored guests. But from a woman. Walking slowly, hand brushing along the edge of the table, eyes lingering on the old portraits hung upon the walls. It is Catherine, not the great, not the conqueror, but an old woman, silver hair tucked beneath a powdered wig, living in a resplendent palace that now feels far too vast. You see her alone in the banquet hall, once filled with music, laughter, and dignitaries from across Europe, now holding only the sound of winds slipping through window panes. That wind, though filtered through 100 velvet curtains, still bites with cold. Not from the lack of light, but from the absence of anyone who truly understands her. Potemkin is gone. Voltaire is dead. Those who once corresponded with her, debated with her, now rest beneath stone markers or lie forgotten in dusty libraries. She has younger lovers now, carefully chosen. But you know, they do not read beside her. Do not speak of Montesquieu or help edit legal drafts by candlelight. They are handsome. But they do not speak the language she craves, the language of intellect and ideas. From time to time, you see Catherine standing at the window, staring out at the mist-covered Neva River. She says nothing. Just presses a hand gently to the glass. An old habit, like softly tapping the past. She still writes. Still issues decrees. But less often now. The causes that once set her aflame, education for peasants, abolition of torture, founding libraries, have faded quietly to the background. In their place are nearer worries. Who will inherit the throne? Will her son, Paul, be worthy, or will he undo everything she has built? You see, Paul is not like his mother. He lacks her calm. He does not read for 7 hours a day. He is quick to anger, prone to suspicion. And what Catherine fears most is this, that when she is gone, no one will keep the reformist flame alive. She once considered bypassing Paul, leaving the throne to her grandson, Alexander. Bright, capable, promising. But she never had the chance to put it in writing. History always arrives a few steps too early. In her diary, she once wrote, "I live among hundreds. And yet, sometimes, I have never had a single person." A quiet confession, not meant for posterity, just for herself. The palace remains lit. The banquets still happen. But every night, as darkness falls, there is one room where Catherine sits alone. No throne. No state matters. Only paper, ink, and the memories of a life that no one ever truly understood. That morning, the sky over St. Petersburg was pale gray. No rain. No sun. Just a quiet stillness, as if the whole city were holding its breath. In her study, Catherine woke early as she always did. A stack of documents waited on the desk. A pot of tea stood ready on a silver tray. But that day, she never got the chance to pour it. You see her collapse, suddenly. No cry. Just the soft scrape of a chair tipping over. And then, a long silence, as if even time itself paused, unsure of what would come next. The servants found her unconscious. They carried her to her bedroom, called for doctors, summoned the royal family. But everyone there, and you, too, already knew, Catherine had begun her final journey. For 17 hours, she lay motionless, eyes closed, surrounded by portraits that seemed to watch, helplessly. There were no final words. No tearful farewell like the ones written in novels. Only silence, strange, even painful, for a woman who had once been the strongest voice in Europe. When she took her last breath on the morning of November 17, 1796, no one spoke. Not from fear, but from shock. The woman who had shaken an empire, who had pulled Russia from its frozen margins into global power, was now a small, quiet body in a room too large. Her son, Paul, took the throne. And the very next day, he began unraveling her legacy. He repealed her reforms, reshuffled her cabinet, and even ordered her buried with the simplest rites possible. As if he were trying to erase her from history. But that is impossible. Because though Catherine is gone, the buildings she built, the schools she opened, the cities she named, they remain. Her letters, thousands of pages, remain. And her ideas, of enlightenment, of law, of progress, though briefly buried, continued to slip quietly into the generations that followed. She was no saint. Nor was she a tyrant. She was human. A complex human. A woman who knew that to rewrite history, sometimes one must write with both light and shadow. Catherine's legacy was never just in the crown. It lived in the question she left behind. How does an empire become not just stronger, but more humane? How does a woman become as strong as steel and as soft as velvet, without asking anyone's permission to be both? You walk slowly down the marble hallway. Your footsteps echo like a slow ticking clock. A great door closes behind you. But it is not a period. It is an ellipsis. There is something strange about standing in the empty rooms of a palace that has just lost its queen. Not because of the silence, but because within that silence, so much remains unsaid. Catherine left this world not with a parade, but with a stillness that settled deep. The same way she wrote the final chapters of her reign, not with applause, but with ink that could never be erased from history. You remain in that room a little longer, staring up at the high ceiling, out at the misted windowpane. And then you understand, Catherine never truly left. She simply stepped softly into another layer of time. As if history were a labyrinth, and she had turned down one of its hidden corridors. You walk out of the palace. No entourage. No orchestral swell. Just the echo of your footsteps on cold stone, carrying you farther away from 18th century Russia. And then, the wind shifts. No more European church bells. No more northern chimney smoke. Instead, humid mist. Thick leaves beneath your feet. Strange birds calling out across silent trees. And before you, a low pyramid cloaked in red moss. Beyond it, the jungles of Chiapas. No throne. No scepter. But here, too, there was once a queen. Not one who ruled with edicts, but one dusted in red pigment, cradled in jade, and buried deep, like a star that had fallen from the sky. You kneel, gently pressing your hand to the cool stone. No name. No script. Only red. And the story begins again. You descend the damp stone steps, your hand trailing along the cold wall veiled in lichen. The torchlight behind you doesn't reach far, it only flickers over faint carvings, coiled serpents, radiant suns, eyes that never close. The corridor narrows, forcing you to bend lower, move slower. There are no bells here. Only the whisper of the earth. And then, you see her. Not seated on a throne, but lying still in a great stone sarcophagus. All around her is red dust, strange, shimmering in the firelight. The scent is metallic. The smell of time, of ceremony, and of something you cannot name. They call her the Red Queen, though no one knows her true name. There are no inscriptions on the lid. No stele to tell her tale. Only the color red. Cinnabar, fine ground mercury sulfide, coats the coffin, the bones, and every offering placed within. Red like blood. Red like the rising sun. Red like the gate between the living and the dead. You lean closer, catching sight of the jade mask still embracing her skull. Tiny fragments pieced together to form a face, not meant to be seen, but remembered. A reminder that this woman was once revered as a deity, held power that needed no voice. Around her, there is no gold. Only jade. Necklaces, earrings, hairpins, glimmering green, carved with motifs of flowers, serpents, and flame. Each piece set in place with near impossible precision. Not for beauty, but for guidance. To help her soul find its way through Xibalba, the underworld, where death waits patiently. Every item here is a symbol. A map only the spirit could read. A bone needle. An obsidian blade. A small clay vessel, sealed 1,000 years ago. No one opens it. It might hold food for the afterlife. Or perhaps the soul itself. You stand still. The breeze from the cave mouth drifts in, lifting a few red motes like mist. No one knows who she was. But surely, once someone did. They hid her here, in the jungle, without signs, without statues, as if fearing the noisy world might shatter such a precious soul. And slowly, you begin to understand something. You don't need to know her name. Only that she was here. That she was once the center of ceremony, of power, of Maya belief. In a civilization where women could be queens, priestesses, keepers of the sacred flame, silence is not forgetfulness. It is the highest form of reverence. You sit down. Say nothing. And need say nothing. Because sometimes, history isn't found in words. It's found in the red dust settled over a resting skeleton that hasn't moved for over 1,000 years. You're still sitting there, beside the stone coffin veiled in red dust. No one hurries you. There are no clocks. Only time, coiled in stillness, quiet as water in a deep well. In front of you, she remains, without title, without history. And yet someone once loved her enough to ensure she would never be forgotten. Scattered around that slender skeleton are tiny objects that whisper, a carved bone shard, a rough, unpolished gem, a broken necklace, a bone needle, its tip sharp as an arrowhead, perhaps a tool for ritual bloodletting, or a symbol of power, of strength beyond pain. The jade mask still rests in place. Its green has darkened over centuries, glinting beneath torchlight like half-closed eyes. There is no smile carved there, nor the commanding expression of Egyptian kings. Only peace. A quiet, contained beauty, as though even in death, she remained the sovereign of this chamber. You wonder, if this had been a man, would there be songs? Stone tablets? 1,000 glyphs detailing triumphs, kingdoms, lineage? But no. For this woman, the Maya chose another way. They buried her nameless. Not because she lacked importance, but because they believed names are for the living to speak, and those who have crossed beyond need not be called. She is presence. She is symbol. She is right. The thin boundary between the sacred and the mortal. The tomb is not large, but every detail is placed with the reverence of an altar. The clay vessels by her feet are scorched black. Perhaps they once held cacao, or maize-fermented spirits, the drink a soul needs to pass through Zabalba, the dark realm where death does not ask permission to knock. You notice the bones of a hummingbird, so small they could have been missed. Perhaps a totem, or a symbol of love, for to the Maya, the hummingbird was a messenger between worlds. Everything placed around her is not meant to flaunt wealth, but to say, "This one lived with ritual, and now shall die with ritual." Each item is a part of the rite, a rung on the ladder from flesh to soul. And then you realize, there are no inscriptions, no engraved deeds, no name. And yet you do not feel emptiness. You feel fullness. So full that if even a single word were added, it would be too much. Because sometimes, power does not need to be shouted. It needs only a stone room, a dusting of red powder, a jade mask, and an arrangement precise down to the very last mote of ash. You rise. Red dust still glimmers on your sleeve. This low, vaulted chamber no longer smells of earth, but of something deeper, the scent of time, of meaning, of a world no longer meant for the living. With each step you take around the stone sarcophagus, you circle Maya belief itself, slow, dense, and breathtaking. The Maya believed death was not an end. It was a passage, a threshold. And if someone was buried like this queen, with a jade mask, ritual bone needles, and a coating of cinnabar, then it was not death. It was ascension. You kneel beside a sealed ceramic jar. The lid is cracked. A faint aroma of fermented cacao drifts out, bitter, sweet, strange. In Maya ritual, cacao was not merely a drink. It was the drink of the gods. A sacred blood made from seeds, meant to nourish the soul as it journeyed into the next world. Scattered around the tomb are fragments of animal bone, hummingbird, serpent, perhaps jaguar. Each creature had a role. The bird to fly across the soul's river. The snake to slip through hidden doors. The jaguar to guard the path from wandering spirits. An obsidian, black volcanic glass, was buried with her not as ornament, but as blade. The Maya believed that, in death, the soul needed something sharp to cut the invisible threads still tethered to the world of flesh. Obsidian was the spiritual shears. You realize, the objects were not placed randomly. Every jar, every bone, every needle obeys a sacred geometry, a mirrored cycle of the sun's descent through the underworld each night. If that path is interrupted, the soul becomes lost. It cannot return, cannot reincarnate, cannot remember who it was. The jade mask is the anchor of identity. In the world beyond, all forms shift. If a soul carries no mask, no face, it dissolves into chaos. It loses shape. And with it, its name. The Maya did not write her name, but they made sure she would not lose her face. That was how they said, "This one, even if her name is taken by the wind, will not be forgotten." You glance back one last time, and understand that this is not a tomb. It is a map. A miniature temple. A gateway made of blood and stone, not for the dead to walk through, but for the living to step out of their indifference, and remember that some deaths are prepared like rituals grander than life itself. You leave the stone tomb, not with footsteps, but with breath. As if part of you remained with that red dust, and another part is drifting away, lightly, slowly, through layers of earth, roots, and underground veins. You rise into the light of 20th century Mexico. No more carved stone. No more jungle. Now, the sound of car horns mingled with bird song. Wooden footsteps echoing on tiled floors. And the smell, paint oils, hibiscus blossoms, and the last trace of tequila in a small glass left by the window. Before you stands a blue house. La Casa Azul. No temples here. And yet this too is a place of worship. A place where memory clings to every wall. A place that also bore witness to a woman who lay more than she stood, hurt more than she smiled, and painted more than she spoke. You step inside. A breeze slips through iron window bars. And in the middle of that sunlit room is a mirror. You look into it. But the eyes staring back are not your own. They are deep, piercing. A gaze that cuts through centuries. Above them, a unibrow, bold, black, defiant. No jade mask. Yet still a face of power, not crowned, but carved from pain itself. It is Frida. Frida Kahlo. Not a queen. Not a warrior. But the most modern embodiment of torn beauty. Of life that has passed through death, and still dares to paint it in color. You look at the first painting. A woman paints herself, stabbed, split, opened, bound by cords. And yet she stares back, asking, "Will you dare to look?" No jade mask here. But you know, if the Red Queen could carve her own image, it might look like this, not afraid, not apologizing, not hiding the broken pieces. You move slowly through the paintings. Each one a private ritual. No sacrifices, but there is blood. There are blades. There are tears shaped into flowers. A body crucified, ignited, and still intact. Between these two women, Red Queen and Frida, lies 1,000 years. One lost her name. The other made her name a monument. But both understood, the body is where history passes through. Where power settles, not on a throne, but beneath the skin, in scars and brushstrokes. Frida did not paint to survive. She painted to resist. To speak. Just as the Red Queen once lay still, not to vanish, but to make others come. To bow. To listen to a greatness that spoke without words. You stand between two worlds. A deep tomb. A blue room. And you realize, you don't have to be empress, or legend, or goddess. You just have to dare to remain whole, in a world built to tear you apart. That alone is enough for history to remember you. Even if only as a layer of red dust. Or a single stroke of blood-colored paint. You are in a small room. The walls are cobalt blue. The window opens onto a garden of cacti, red flowers, incense smoke, and birdsong woven with the distant sound of wagon wheels. On the bed lies a body that cannot rise. But on the easel, a soul no one could bind. Frida lies there. Not resting, but rebuilding herself. Each morning, she wakes in pain. Not the kind you can medicate away, but pain that roots into the marrow, into the spine, the nerves, even the dreams. After the bus accident at age 18, her body was nearly shattered. Pelvis crushed. Spine broken. Left leg deformed. She wore a steel corset around her ribs, like a cage. But Frida didn't ask for an escape. She painted. Not because she wanted to be an artist, but because there was no other way to stay alive. A mirror was hung above her bed. The easel tilted toward her. Brushes tied to her fingers. She lay there like a living mummy. And still her hand moved. Still her eyes defied. No one taught her to paint. And no one could stop her. Her first subject? Herself. Not because she adored herself, but because it was the only thing left. Frida painted herself with bones exposed, heart bleeding, spine broken, face split, womb torn. Nothing gentle. No sweet colors. And yet, no one could look away. Because in those fractured forms, something pulsed, power. Not political power, but the power of a person who dares to look at herself, with all the hurt, the weakness, the rage, and not apologize for any of it. To look at a painting by Frida is to read an unsent letter. One that's raw and poetic. Furious and longing. Each color like a stitch. Each line like self-surgery, cutting open, exposing, then sewing closed again. Sometimes she painted herself as a martyr. Sometimes as a wild woman of the forest. Sometimes as an uprooted tree, bleeding yet blooming. Frida did not ask for your pity. She simply said, "This is me. If you are willing to look, I am here." No spotlight. No stage. Just a broken body in a blue house. And from that very place, she created art that asked no permission, sought no approval. It only asked to be true. You are sitting in a vibrant living room at La Casa Azul, where every door is hand-painted, and a wall is adorned with rows of terracotta skulls. The air here is not cold like in a museum. It's alive. It's chaotic. It's real. And Frida's love was the same. Frida Kahlo loved Diego Rivera as if her body had never been broken. Diego was not handsome. He was large, heavy, clumsy. But he had the eyes of someone who had painted history in sweeping walls of color. When Frida met him, she was barely in her 20s. He was already a monument. She brought him her paintings. Not asking for praise. Just one question. Should I keep painting? Diego looked. And nodded. That nod changed everything. They fell in love. Loud, overflowing, tangled love. And then they married. People called it the wedding of the elephant and the dove. But in truth, it was the marriage of two worlds, art and politics, violence and tenderness, betrayal and the impossibility of letting go. Diego betrayed her. Many times. With students. With models. Even with Frida's own sister. Frida hurt. But she didn't run. She painted. And the more it hurt, the deeper she painted. Her love wasn't hidden beneath the bed. It was on the canvas, like a scalpel slicing the heart, like two Fridas sitting together, one bleeding, one holding hands but not looking. She wrote in her diary, pages splashed red about Diego. Some days she wrote, "I love you more than I love myself." Some days she crossed the line out, and drew a heart split in two. Frida had lovers, too. Both men and women. Not for revenge. But to find herself again inside a love too vast, too heavy, too consuming. But no matter where she went, she always returned to Diego. Not from weakness. But because that love, to her, was part of her flesh. Like a wounded leg, one that couldn't be cut off, but would never heal. They divorced. Then married again. The second time, Frida set terms, separate rooms. No shared money. No titles. Just the choice to exist side by side. You see Frida's small bed, set opposite her painting table. You see the Tawana dresses she wore, bright, powerful, as if to shield a back fracturing vertebra by vertebra. Frida loved like she painted. Without fear of being wrong. Without needing to be understood. Only needing to be true. And from that brokenness, she didn't paint romantic love. She painted marriage as blades, as wilted flowers, as hearts suspended by wires. Because for Frida, art wasn't makeup for emotions. It was dissection. So that anyone who looked would see themselves in it, even just a little. You're standing in Frida's bedroom. The bed is still there, 4 tall posts, with a mirror hung above. The steel corset rests at the headboard. And by the window, a vase of dried flowers remains untouched. Because the one who lived here never truly left. Frida's body deteriorated year by year. Surgery after surgery. Her back, her legs, her womb, everything collapsing piece by piece. She moved from crutches to a wheelchair to being bedridden. Once she wrote, "I hope the exit is joyful, and I hope never to return." But Frida never truly surrendered. Even when confined to her bed, she still painted. Her first solo exhibition in Mexico was held in 1953. Doctors said, "You mustn't leave your bed." Frida said, "Then the bed will come with me." And she arrived at the gallery, on a stretcher, carried in. Lying at the heart of the room, amid applause and tearful eyes. No one could say she was weak. No one dared call her a victim. Frida knew she was dying. But she didn't retreat quietly. Her final painting was a plate of watermelons. Slices red, ripe, bursting with life, almost bleeding. On one slice she wrote, "Viva la vida." Long live life. Not a farewell. A declaration. Frida died in July 1954, in the very house where she was born. Her final diary entry. I hope the exit is joyful. Her funeral was held at the Palacio de Bellas Arts, a space usually reserved for national heroes. Her body was draped in the red flag of the Communist Party. In the crematorium, her thick black hair ignited one last time, a flame refusing to go quietly. You think of the Red Queen, buried in silence, nameless, but surrounded by sacred rites to guide her, and Frida, cremated unhidden, but remembered by name across the world. One woman silent in death, one still shouting beyond it. Two women, two eras, but one truth. They weren't given power. They took it. With blood. With art. With pain they never concealed. Now Frida is more than a painter. She's a face on t-shirts, a mural on city walls, a symbol of feminine strength, of resistance, of identity. What she wrote, what she painted, what she lived, still echoes in the modern world, where millions, especially women, find pieces of themselves in her unflinching gaze. You step out of Casa Azul. You glance back. That blue wall, those wooden windows, the painted pots, all seem to whisper, I hurt, but I am still beautiful. I broke, but I am still true. I died, but I never disappeared. How many lives have you walked through tonight? From the damp thatched huts of medieval Europe, through the sacred red dust of a Mayan tomb, and finally, to the mirror, meeting the unyielding gaze of Frida Kahlo. And now you don't need to go anywhere else. Just lie still. Gently. Imagine yourself wrapped in a soft wool blanket. Outside, it's night. The wind rustles quietly through the leaves. The fire crackles steadily in the hearth. There is no time here. No calendar. No to-do list. No one needs you to try any harder. There is only you. And sleep. Let your body melt into the bed. Each vertebra releasing. Each muscle loosening. Your breath slowing, light, steady. Like waves. Like a lullaby. Each exhale is a layer of memory settling like dust. Each heartbeat a step further from the world. No more thinking. No need to remember. No need to understand. What you've just heard has already touched something inside you. Light as ash. Enduring as jade. Glowing softly, like candlelight in a stone room. You don't have to be an empress. Or an artist. Or a warrior. You only have to be yourself. And sometimes, like tonight, being yourself is enough. Sleep well.